Dear YouTube, in case you are investigating this video due to a complaint about hate speech or copyright violation, allow me to give the following assurances. Firstly, a word on copyright. If the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania is unhappy because I've used their propaganda in a way they disapprove of, please know that I am very familiar with copyright law and have ensured that any use of copyrighted material in this video falls within the fair use provisions, particularly as pertain to criticism and parody. Secondly, let me ease any concerns you may have about hate speech. Though I am unapologetically a critic of the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses, I feel no hatred whatsoever when it comes to individual believers. I have even spoken out on occasion against the harassment and mistreatment of witnesses. Rather than being hateful, this video, and indeed my channel, represents my attempt at respectfully offering a helpful resource for witnesses who are beginning to think of their faith as false or harmful and would like to know the other side of the argument. Hello and welcome to my review of what I believe to be the 10 worst Jehovah's Witness videos that were released during 2017. Now we've got a lot of horrendous material to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
There are people who believe there is no need for a religious organization. They feel they have their own personal relationship with God, and that is good enough. They see no need to be associated with a specific organization. However, what does God's own inspired word suggest? That He would use an organization or channel through which spiritual food would be dispensed from His word, the Bible. In fact, the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses is patterned after the first century Christian congregation as set forth in the Scriptures. Though there are thousands of national and international organizations around the world, they are organized according to human viewpoints and philosophies. But our organization is different. It is theocratic. That means it is ruled by Jehovah as head over all. Matthew 24:45 says that Jesus has appointed a faithful and discreet slave to serve spiritual food at the proper time. Today, 7 anointed men make up the faithful slave, and collectively, they are known as the governing body. And Jesus uses the Holy Spirit to direct these men in harmony with the Scriptures.
So this was Tony Morris speaking in the July 2017 JW Broadcasting episode. And his talk, which was about the organization and about the governing body, it was essentially from beginning to end horrendous propaganda and misinformation and deception and bad use of scripture, all intended to persuade witnesses that they needed to devote their lives to serving Watchtower. And my rebuttal to this, actually, I'm going to put in the description a list of all of the 10 worst videos, and where I've done a more detailed rebuttal, because I spent a lot of time doing my rebuttal to this video, because he brings in the scriptures from Acts 15 and 16 about the whole issue with circumcision, and he points to that as being proof that there was a first century governing body. And as I explain in my full rebuttal, that simply is not to be found when you examine in detail, thoroughly, the New Testament, the Greek scriptures. I mean, even the very fact that you had Paul basically deciding for himself where he would go, not reporting to the apostles in Jerusalem, but basically doing his own thing or being sent places by the Antioch congregation. And just the fact that he was writing such a huge chunk of the Greek scriptures, not the apostles, Paul wasn't one of the 12. He was supposedly handpicked as an apostle to the nations by Jesus. And yet Paul was responsible for so much of the written commands that Christianity now hinges on. And so how can you possibly say that there was centralized power resting in Jerusalem, determining every facet of Christian worship in the first century? It just doesn't fit with what we know about the Bible and about early Christianity. But Tony Morris does his very best at convincing witnesses to think otherwise and to assume that just because Tony says, well, hey, I'm spirit anointed and so are my 6 friends, and we are the faithful slaves, so you can follow us, just because he makes that claim, apparently we all need to believe him.
Look in the subject index under goals. There are 11 references to paragraphs in the book on that subject. After reading about all of the possibilities and different categories, you'd be in a better position to plan your life for a great future in the earthly part of Jehovah's organization. New ones and young ones need to be able to go through the process of deep study to get to the Bible's truth and get it etched into their minds and lodged deep into their hearts. Therefore, if you parents realize that you have not studied both books with your young ones, it would be good to see that a schedule is established to do so.
Isn't that, in a nutshell, what Tony's whole talk was about when we look back? And we see, well, here are all the goals in the back of the organised book that we'd like you to be aspiring to. Here are all the ways that you can serve the Watchtower organisation. And by the way, you parents, don't you forget to indoctrinate your children as witnesses, because we're really struggling to persuade thinking adults with critical thinking skills and access to the internet to become Jehovah's Witnesses. We've decided the easiest way to do it is to lie to kids. So please don't forget to do that for us, please, because where else are we going to get our future generation of Jehovah's Witnesses from? That, in essence, is what this whole talk was about.
We are just imperfect men trying to follow the lead of Christ and the Holy Spirit. Verse 27 says, "But God chose the foolish things of the world to put the wise men to shame." Then verse 30 says that Christ Jesus has become to us wisdom from God. That is where the direction and wisdom of the organization comes from, not from mere man. Jehovah and Jesus use all of us to get a remarkable work accomplished. We are proud to be a part of this Spirit-directed organization. As one older circuit overseer was heard to say, this is the best imperfect organization on earth. There are no perfect organizations on earth. However, this is the best of them all. And we appreciate the contribution all of you make to the success of the preaching work worldwide.
So there we have it. Those were just a few selected clips from Tony Morris's talk, again back in July 2017. And what's fascinating about those concluding remarks is he tries again to push this line about the governing body being imperfect. We're just imperfect men. Even giving this anecdote from an unnamed circuit overseer that, well, actually we're the best imperfect organization on the earth. But at the same time he's saying, well, actually the things that we write and the teachings that we come up with and the policies that we put in place, you're to consider them as coming from God. And there you have the contradiction. How can you possibly say, oh, well, we're imperfect men. We get it wrong from time to time, but what we say is from God. How can you have both? That is the contradiction that you have to wrestle with. That's the square that you need to circle if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And bottom line, as I've repeatedly argued, you don't get to say, oh, well, we're imperfect and we make mistakes when you punish people who disagree with you.
You see, back then, some were looking to a certain date as signifying the end of this old system of things. A few even went so far as selling their homes and quitting their jobs. I admit, I was ready to see this old system go away too. But something just didn't seem right. Both at meetings and in my personal study, I was reminded of what Jesus said. Nobody knows the day or hour. I was dedicated to Jehovah, not a date. After that year came and went, most of those who had wrong expectations made the needed adjustments, and they stayed. We didn't run away, and we didn't give up. We trusted in Jehovah. When I see older ones now, I don't just see gray hair. I see living, breathing examples of endurance.
Wow, Grandpa. I didn't know you had to endure through all that.
We got through it with Jehovah's help. But Scott, you were in Pioneer School recently, right?
Yeah, just a year ago.
Who were your instructors?
I can still remember when I first watched this video, having been sent a bunch of videos that had been leaked, because each year the convention videos now are being leaked out so that we get to look at them before the witnesses look at them. And just kind of randomly I clicked on one of the videos and it happened to be this one. And I just could not believe that they had rewritten history so blatantly. And, you know, the thing is with rewriting history, you can get away with it just about if it's history that no one can remember. So if you're talking about, you know, fuzzy, vague events that may or may not have happened invisibly or visibly between 1914 and 1919, you can pretty much, you know, fool people because no one was around then. No one was. But when it comes to 1975, we're talking about a year. I mean, I'm not old enough to remember what happened in that year, but a lot of people watching this video will remember what happened in that year if you were a Jehovah's Witness in that year. And you can remember the certainty with which the governing body, the Watchtower Society, went about telling people, oh, well, we've worked out Bible prophecy. We've figured out that there's this, that we need to pay close attention to the creation of Adam and how many thousand years it's been since Adam's creation. And God's plan revolves around that. So if 1975 marks 6,000 years since Adam's creation, well, that must be when Armageddon's coming. That's essentially what they were saying. Now, they can pretend that they weren't saying that, but the problem they have is that people can remember them saying that, and it's in the literature that they were printing. So you can actually dig up old Kingdom Ministries and old Watchtower and Awakes where they were, you know, pushing that year. And I will say this, they did do it in a clever way, so as to not make it too obvious, but just obvious enough so that everybody would say, this is what they want us to believe. And they even went as far as to say, which is why this video is so misleading, they went so far as to say, well, if you have the attitude, well, we have no idea what's going to happen, nobody knows the day or the hour, that's the wrong attitude to have, actually. So back then, that's what they were saying to witnesses. No, sorry, those words of Jesus don't apply in this instance. We do need to take things seriously, and you are right to be selling your homes and businesses because that's how urgent things are. And then, all these years later, in 2017, they published this horrendous video, which again rewrites history, portrays everything completely differently, and says actually a true Jehovah's Witness back in 1975 or the years leading up to 1975 would have ignored us. A true Jehovah's Witness would have taken it all with a pinch of salt, and having read the Bible would have figured out that they weren't to buy into this too much. So actually, anyone who did suffer financially or otherwise as a result of our false prediction Actually, it's their fault. They shouldn't have taken what we were saying seriously.
This month, I'd like to talk about the efforts Jehovah's organization is making to produce literature, publications, articles that are as accurate as possible. We're going to talk about accuracy of statement. For example, an evolutionist might make a statement which, on the surface, appears to confirm his support of creation. Or perhaps an atheist will make a statement that seems to indicate that he believes in God. But when you examine the quote in context, you realize that that isn't what the author had in mind at all. We would never deliberately distort a quotation. We try very hard to use all of our quotations in context. Now, it's important to keep up with the very latest research. Something that was stated years ago as a fact may have been disproved. And the reason why is obvious. Someone may spend his entire life researching a very limited point in history, a very small point in history. And of course, if he spends so much time researching, he's going to uncover things. And so it's not surprising that from time to time we have to adjust our view of some historical points. We have to check. And later on in this discussion, we're going to consider some examples of it. It'll be fun. You'll love it.
Now, I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much because obviously this was from the November 2017 JW Broadcasting episode, and I had a whole bunch to say on this. So again, the link will be below if you want to get my full thoughts. But it's a perfect example of Watchtower swearing up and down that it would never do something that it has actually been caught doing. That's what's so astonishing, especially when David Splain gives this scenario about an evolutionist or an atheist being misquoted. And as I point out in my rebuttal, well, what about the January 2015 Awake, where you did precisely that and got caught red-handed, and now your digital version of that magazine is different from the one that got printed at the actual time. So absolutely amazing. Another irony that I also mentioned in my rebuttal, and I'll briefly repeat, is this whole thing of, well, we need to defer to the experts. It could be that someone spent their entire life studying this particular field of history or this particular field of science, and who are we to contradict them? So we need to keep up with what they're discovering and what they're writing about, and we need to check all the time to make sure that our spiritual food is kept up to date. And yet you have obvious examples of where they put their hands over their ears if an expert says something that contradicts their official theology. For example, evolution. For example, Jerusalem not being destroyed in 607 BCE. Again, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, please look into this more deeply. Look into 607 BCE. Try to find out who objectively is saying, what external sources are saying that Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 607 BCE. You will find that nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying it. And we have very good reasons for asserting. We can be dogmatic about it. We can say it had to have happened instead in 587, 586 BCE, because that's what the overwhelming consensus of archaeology, including cuneiform tablets, have to say about that event. So again, it's just incredible that Splain would try to assure witnesses that they take things seriously when it comes to experts who know their stuff, while there are clear examples where Watchtower just does not listen to experts and instead insists on its own narrative.
According to the Smithsonian Knowledge Encyclopedia, the Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. The Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. Well, the problem is with the date, 2550. The global flood occurred about 200 years after that date. So what are the chances that the Sphinx survived the flood? Unless, of course, you think that that's how the Sphinx lost his nose. Now, these dates are good for you school children to keep in mind when you're writing reports. Sometimes you copy something from an encyclopedia and it gives a certain date, but think about the date of the flood, 2370, so that what you put in your report is as accurate as possible. If you're like me, you've probably made some of those statements yourself at times. The statements were based on the best research we had at the time, but this is to illustrate the fact that times change. Research facilities improve. A scholar does exhaustive research on one point of history, and he uncovers things that were previously unknown. So we have to keep up. We have to check, check, check. And when credible research reveals that we have to adjust or tweak a statement that we made in the past, we do so without hesitation. Our goal is to provide information that is as accurate as possible, because we know that you brothers and sisters use this information. You quote it in the field ministry. You use it in your public talks. And so we want to make sure that our brothers are fed with the most accurate spiritual food possible. We're imperfect, of course, and we are going to make mistakes. And when we do, we have to correct them. Our goal is to do the best we can in all our imperfection.
Of course it is, David. Again, where do you begin? Where do you even begin? In the same episode, in the same talk, in the same breath almost, Splain is saying, who are we to question the experts? We need to check, check, check. If credible experts say something, who are we to stand in their way and say, we know different? And he's telling school children to ignore what Egyptologists say about the dating of the Sphinx. In the same episode. And this is why, by the way, this is why religion is so pernicious when it comes to indoctrination, because we're talking about lying to children. If you really want to believe something and it doesn't make any sense at all, it's not rational, it contradicts what scholars say, that is your right. I will not lose sleep if there is someone watching this video who is of a mind where they say, well, if the Bible says something and science and archaeology say something different, I'm going to go with the Bible. Hey, that's your decision. But I think where I do have a problem is when, children are raised to have that attitude. They're blank canvases. If they end up having that mindset purely through their own thought processes and purely because that's what they decide, then fine. But to actually do what Splain's doing here and lie to children and say, no, actually, you need to cross out in your school textbooks, basically, if it says that this event happened earlier than the flood. Honestly, it's difficult to find a more perfect example of the end game of religions like Jehovah's Witnesses and the way that they seek to impose their narrative on everyone, even if it means flat out contradicting what we know through science and what we know through history and archaeology, or the study of history and archaeology. And all the while we get this repeated refrain, well, we're just imperfect, which Splain says there. Of course we make mistakes. I'd love to compile a list of all the times that Watchtower has apologised for saying something that's inaccurate, or for making a false prediction, or for screwing up in some way. The trouble is that I don't have anything to go on. They don't apologise. If you're going to recognise that you're imperfect, if you're going to recognise that you're fallible, if you're going to recognise that you make mistakes, then what needs to follow is apologies when you screw up. And that's one thing that you will never find with Watchtower. You won't find apologies. With 1975, there was something printed in 1980. So 5 years after 1975, Watchtower printed an apology, which, as it turns out, was written by Ray Franz, of all people. And even that, I mean, Ray Franz writes in Crisis of Conscience that it would have been far more abject if he hadn't had to get it passed through the governing body for approval. Watchtower is not an organisation that apologises, so again, for Splain to say otherwise is extremely misleading and disingenuous.
My theme for this month's broadcast is Young Ones. Build your future with Jehovah. Personally, I am so thankful to Jehovah that positive peer pressure was put on me to enter the pioneer ministry right out of high school. What a blessing and a protection it was to enter the regular pioneer work at age 17 and to be able to go to Bethel at 18. And who are the stupid ones? Well, this scripture contrasts such a person with those who are wise. It is not talking about someone who lacks mental intellect. It is talking about someone who does not make wise decisions spiritually from Jehovah's standpoint. And if we think about it, anyone who is not really serving Jehovah, at least right now, that one is unwise indeed. If we spend a lot of time near a dead body, a corpse, we will probably pick up a disease. Well, it is similar with spending time with a person who is spiritually sick, or worse, spiritually dead.
So these were Stephen Lett's comments from the March 2017 JW Broadcasting episode, his famous Young Ones speech. And wow, I don't know whether I said at the time, but what a perfect way of introducing the outsider to Jehovah's Witnesses and just kind of showing them at a glance how cult-like Jehovah's Witnesses are. Because here, I mean, the whole purpose of this episode is to convince young ones, to convince children that they need to dedicate themselves to serving Stephen Lett and his friends, the governing body, otherwise known as Jehovah's Organisation. It's hijacking their potential. It's the worst form of exploitation. It's taking the very best or the most crucial years of someone's life and saying, well, actually, we need you to give all of that, sacrifice all of that to us. That's the whole point of this broadcast. And layered onto that is this very, very cult-like message that if you don't agree with us, if you don't align your beliefs with what we're saying, well, you're stupid. Actually, you're spiritually sick or spiritually dead, and hanging around with you would be like hanging around a dead corpse. It would be dangerous to hang around with you because we might catch something. I mean, can you possibly get more cult-like than that?
The sooner you can get baptized, the sooner you will receive greater protection and blessings from Jehovah. Not long ago, it made me very happy to observe a little 10-year-old brother get baptized. Never be ashamed of who you are. You are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you recall, Satan convinced Eve that she was being deprived by Jehovah and was missing out on something good. Now, it is true that Eve was missing out on something. But what was she really missing out on? A tormented conscience. Her beautiful hair turning gray. Her teeth falling out. Her perfect skin wrinkling up like a prune. Being bent over from old age. Hobbling around on a cane. And finally, dying. Jehovah doesn't want Satan, who is described as a roaring, devouring lion at 1 Peter 5:8, he doesn't want him to gobble down you young ones.
So there you have Stephen Lett, ladies and gentlemen, from the March 2017 broadcast. Again, what an overt attempt at manipulating young minds and trying to convince children, essentially, to join your religion. Perfectly summed up when he talks about how wonderful it is that people are getting baptized as young as 10. 10 years old. If you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, please tell me how a 10-year-old is supposed to know what their religious beliefs are. Are you the same person? If you're watching this, are you the same person as you were when you were 10? Do you feel you've changed in any way? Do you feel your opinions have changed in any way? Do you feel your personality has changed in any way from when you were 10? So how can you possibly be expecting or asking or praising a 10-year-old for pledging their entire lives to a religious movement that will punish them with family estrangement if they almost inevitably start questioning their beliefs? And I believe all Jehovah's Witnesses, to some extent, some are better at suppressing it than others. I believe all witnesses will question at least something about their beliefs. But guess what? They're in a captive organization, and it doesn't matter what their opinions are. It just doesn't matter, because once you're baptized, sorry, you've made your commitment. We made you make this pledge when you were 10 years old, when you were too young to sign a contract, when you were too young to start a job, when you were too young to drive a vehicle. We've made you make this lifelong pledge, but when you weren't yet of legal age, and we're holding you to it. What a desperate organization it is to be insisting that children do that, and to actually be reveling, when you think about it, in children doing that. I mean, you could kind of understand if they were okay with it. If they were okay with it happening, but they weren't pushing it, so that they were leaving it for the parents to make that call, and they just weren't kind of disciplining or chastising the parents who make their children get baptized at 10. You could kind of excuse that, because there's plausible deniability there. But when they're actively going out and saying, this is the age that we'd like you to be getting baptized from. I think in the 2017 yearbook it mentions a kid getting baptized as young as 8. How is this any different from infant baptism, which the organisation has long condemned in its publications when it's the Catholics doing it? But if it's Jehovah's organisation doing it, hey, we don't care. Just get them baptized, and then we get to count them in our figures.
It wasn't my worst day at school, but pretty close. It all started first thing this morning. Everyone was signing a birthday card for one of our classmates, Lucas. He just got home from being at the hospital for cancer treatments. No thanks, I'm a Jehovah's Witness and I don't celebrate birthdays.
What?
He said we all have to keep making sure of what's acceptable to Jehovah, because Satan is a master at tricking us. Then he used the example of Aaron. The Israelites asked Aaron to make them a god. So Aaron made a golden calf, thinking that it could represent Jehovah. He told the people, "There's a festival to Jehovah tomorrow." But true worship was being mixed with false worship. And Jehovah was not happy. And many were punished. That example helped me a lot. I know birthdays are wrong because the Bible teaches that they are not approved by Jehovah. Can I go see Lucas?
Yeah, go ahead, buddy. He's right over there.
How you been feeling? A little better. And then I realized something. Instead of celebrating one day, I could share with Lucas our hope of living forever on a beautiful paradise earth. No sickness ever again. They'll build houses.
So this was also from the November 2017 JW Broadcasting episode, but it has also, I noticed, been uploaded to JW Broadcasting as a standalone video that's titled Holidays and Celebrations That Displease God. And again, I'm going to try not to duplicate my comments too much, but what a grotesque piece of propaganda. And let's remember, it's aimed at children. So all of this is to manipulate young minds into falling in line with Watchtower's narrative as respects birthdays. And the way they do that in this video is to first of all play on the emotions with this classroom scene where everyone's kind of ganging up on Aidan, including his teacher to some extent, saying, well, you know, can you at least think about it? And then Aidan's all upset and he's in the car and his mother can see that her son is upset. So straight away, the parents who are watching this, Jehovah's Witness parents, are thinking, oh, good grief, that could be my child. What can I do in that situation? Well, parents, what you're supposed to do is sit them down on their beds and read to them from Exodus about how 3,000 Israelites were killed as a result of the golden calf incident. That is apparently what's in store for anybody who signs a birthday card. And we're not done, because what's supposed to make everything okay and the compromise that's reached is that Aidan goes round to Lucas's house with his parents. Lucas, by the way, being someone who, according to Stephen Lett, would be considered bad association, because his thoughts and his beliefs aren't in line with the governing bodies. And actually, the older Lucas gets, the more he will be considered a bad associate, because when the kids are still very young, you know, you can kind of let them off the hook. But the older they get, well, sorry, I shouldn't really be going round to your house and I shouldn't really be associating with you. But what got me really, really annoyed, and you'll have noticed this in the rebuttal, was the way Aidan sneaks into Lucas's room with the purpose of trying to indoctrinate him with Watchtower propaganda. And I realised that in my rebuttal, one or two of you kind of commented, because I said, oh, well, he didn't ask permission. In the video, he does ask permission, but he asks permission to go see Lucas. He doesn't say to Lucas's mother, oh, and I've got some Watchtower propaganda in my backpack that I'm going to get out and show your son, if that's okay with you. He does not, I'm sorry, he doesn't say that. And as I mentioned in my rebuttal, I would be horrified if anyone from any religion, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses, whether it's Mormons, whether it's Catholics, whether it's Muslims, if anyone tries sneaking into Jessica's bedroom to pull out religious propaganda on them, I'm going to have an issue with it. I will have an issue with that. So for Watchtower to be actively telling Jehovah's Witness children and parents that this behaviour is okay, this is acceptable, it's an ends justifies means thing because they need to be saved, absolutely horrendous. And you can see why it's so far up in my list of the 10 worst videos.
Yet there is no truth more clearly taught in the Bible than that of the resurrection of the dead. If the dead are to live again, then they must be resurrected, and God has provided that there shall be a resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is a guarantee that all who have died must be awakened out of death and given a knowledge of the truth. All mankind were born in sin, and the death of the perfect man Jesus provided the purchase price for the right of man to live again, and in due time Jesus will awaken them out of death. All of the dead in God's due time shall be awakened out of death, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away.
So this video was actually first shown to witnesses, I think 2 or 3 years ago at international conventions. It was kind of just a special exclusive video that international convention delegates got to watch. But it got released to Jehovah's Witnesses everywhere in September 2017 in the September broadcast. I'd obviously already seen it, but it was only kind of when I was watching it again for the rebuttal that it really hit me how awful this video is. Because one of the things that I find most disturbing about Jehovah's Witness theology, and something that has impacted on me personally, is the way that the grieving process is hijacked for witnesses. So that if you lose someone in death who's important to you, Jehovah's Witnesses come along and say, well, you know, what you need to do if you want to see them again, because they're not quite dead, they're in Jehovah's memory. If you want to see them again, you need to be the best Jehovah's Witness you can be, and you need to sacrifice everything to serving Watchtower. That is an extremely insidious, exploitative thing to do with people who are emotionally vulnerable, and we see it being celebrated in this video, so that you even have a child looking up at her father saying, does that mean we will see mommy again?
Your parents must be really proud of you.
Well, my moms are both really proud of me. I was raised by 2 wonderful women, you know, life partners.
Oh, yeah, you know, my assistant Marty, I recently found out that he's gay.
You say that like there's something wrong with it. Do you have a problem?
Tess, don't do this.
Why? There's nothing wrong with being gay.
Tess, we live by the Bible's moral standards, but we don't force our beliefs on other people, and we don't judge anyone either.
But you do think being gay is wrong.
Eric, remember where we're at.
Well, we believe there are standards of right and wrong that we should live by. And God's word says that sex is meant to be between a man and a woman who are married to each other.
Look, I don't mean to be rude, sir, but the world has changed.
Honey, maybe we're being too harsh on gays. Some people just seem to be programmed that way.
Look, I know not everyone agrees with us, but we all have free will. And God lets us choose to live by his standards or not. If we go against his standards, we end up hurting ourselves. He just wants what's best for us.
Mom, don't look back. Remember the wife of Lot.
Remember the wife of Lot.
What's wrong?
So what we've just seen were 2 of the worst clips from the drama Remember the Wife of Lot. It was actually in 3 parts, and it was presented almost as like a sitcom, a really morbid and disturbing sitcom at the 2017 Don't Give Up convention. I obviously talked about it extensively in all 3 of my Don't Give Up episodes. I did episodes for Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and this Remember the Wife of Lot was shown on each of those days. So by all means check out my rebuttals for a more in-depth analysis of the material, because there was a lot to get through. I mean, I've just shown what I think were the two worst parts from that drama, but all the way through, I mean, there's so much to go on. There's the misogyny, there's the fact that, basically the female characters are nearly all very unpleasant and nasty and self-obsessed and materialistic. There's the circuit overseer who gets shown basically overstepping his boundaries to the extent where he's interrogating this girl in her own home about her sister, and even trying to suggest someone who she might want to get romantically involved with. He doesn't say that, but the implication's there. That there's just so much to go on, but we need to obviously zero in on the blatant homophobia, anti-gay message, whatever you want to call it. And obviously I understand that there will be lots of people watching this who, for whatever reason, do think that there's something immoral or wrong or insidious or threatening about homosexuality. I just feel or maintain that you can only begrudge people who are homosexual or gay or lesbian or transgender. You can only begrudge them that if it's for religious reasons. If it's for reasons that have to do with what's written in the Bible. Obviously in Leviticus 20 verse 13 it says that gay people should be killed. If you're going to base your morality on what the Bible says, then oh yes, of course, it's terrible that people are gay. But if you look at things objectively and you ask yourself, hang on, who gets hurt exactly if someone's gay? If we stop assuming that the Bible is God's inerrant word, if we stop assuming that there is a God who polices, what we think and what we do and who we do it with, if we stop assuming all of those things, objectively speaking, who gets hurt by someone being gay? I would argue that no one gets hurt. Just by being gay and just by being in love with someone of the same gender. And therefore, the immorality really comes when you have one bunch of people singling out another bunch of people and making their lives miserable just because they aren't attracted to the right gender. When you have one group's values imposed on another group, for reasons that have nothing to do with logic and reason, that's when the real immorality comes in. And that's why this video, the video that touches on the lesbian parents, is so dangerous to be showing that to children, because that's the thing with this Remember the Wife of Lot drama. It's not just for adults, it's for children as well. It's kind of compulsory viewing for families. So to be raising children in that way, to be looking down sneeringly on those that they encounter who may be gay or lesbian, and calling into question their parents if their parents happen to be gay or lesbian, that's very, very dangerous and very, very disturbing. And that's before we even get to the horrendous scene that I also showed you, where Gloria imagines herself turning to salt like Lot's wife supposedly did. As I've repeatedly said, there's no suggestion that the events of Sodom and Gomorrah really happened, or that there even really was a Sodom and Gomorrah. But even if they did happen, when you look into the story in detail, you find that it is not a story you want to be dredging up if you are keen on instilling moral values. What happens to Lot after this whole thing? What happens to Lot and his daughters? Let's see the sequel. Actually, let's not see the sequel. This was a horrendous story. And the part where he offers his daughters to be gang raped. There's nothing to be proud of in this story from the point of view of God and from the point of view of the message that's there. And there's nothing to be proud of in executing someone just for looking in the wrong direction. But when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you have to admire this kind of thinking. And again, how sickening that children will have been subjected to that kind of imagery, where a Jehovah's Witness, a fictional Jehovah's Witness woman, imagines her body turning to salt just because she isn't aligning her values in the way Watchtower would like.
Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child sexual abuse. Parents, you are the first line of defense. Parents, as shrewd ones, you are the first line of defense. You have the need to take all reasonable steps to protect your children from potential dangers, including the abuse that we're mentioning. So by using discernment and good judgment, you can identify potential dangers and safeguard your children from harm, because you as parents are the first line of defense. But now here's our next step. The next step, parents, to safeguard our children, we must help them to gain godly wisdom, to be aware of the dangers. All parents have the responsibility, the God-given responsibility, to protect their children, to teach them what the Bible says about proper sexual conduct. Our children, including our little ones, deserve to be taught about sex accurately from God-believing parents, God-fearing parents,
So what we're watching is the official convention video for the 2017 Don't Give Up convention. This is what you would see if you're a Jehovah's Witness who can't make it to the convention. So this is actually being filmed by Watchtower, hence why I've included it in the 10 worst Jehovah's Witness videos. It's not just like someone's recorded it from their seat. And this particular talk was a symposium item that dealt directly with child safeguarding. This was Watchtower's opportunity to come clean about the rampant child abuse mishandling in the organisation, which has been uncovered by the Australian Royal Commission, by lawsuit after lawsuit. The cat's out of the bag, that it's no longer a secret that Jehovah's Witnesses is a religion that has a terrible reputation when it comes to child safeguarding, and especially in the area of reporting. Essentially, Jehovah's Witnesses are known to cover up child abuse. And here we have a talk where the onus is shifted onto the parents. Apparently it's all to do with the parents. There isn't really an issue as far as the organisation's concerned. Everything rests on the first line of defence, namely the parents. But what this means in practice is that Jehovah's Witness parents are to teach their children proper Christian conduct, because apparently that's where it was going wrong in all of these cases of pedophilia in the Jehovah's Witness religion. If only those victims of abuse had known all about proper Christian conduct, maybe then they wouldn't have been abused. Maybe they wouldn't have been molested. It's jaw-dropping to consider the ineptitude of this organisation when we have here an opportunity, a golden opportunity for Watchtower to hold its hands up and say, listen, we've made mistakes here. This is how we're going to put it right. They have this opportunity and instead they turn it right round and they essentially blame it on the parents and, amazingly, as we're going to see in further detail, on the children themselves.
Parents, ask yourselves, have I trained my children regarding what are proper displays of affection, the importance of wearing modest clothing, and the need for others to respect their privacies? And we're also helping them to train their conscience, to have that inner sense of right and wrong so they can examine decisions and be led to the right scripturally based decision. And let's remember this. When Jesus faced a serious threat during his childhood, his father, Jehovah, intervened to protect him. You'll recall that Herod was to search for the young child to kill him. But Jehovah sent his angel to Joseph to give him instruction to take the child into Egypt. Believing mothers and fathers, single parents, those with blended families, those in divided households, please be assured our Heavenly Father, the same Father that protected Jesus, will certainly support and appreciate your efforts to safeguard your children.
So apparently, when a child gets raped within the Jehovah's Witness organization, it's because of the decisions they've made. It's because of their ability or lack thereof to decide on what is right and what is wrong, including the decisions they make about modest dress. This is the extent of the ineptitude when it comes to Watchtower and its inability to grasp what the problem is all about. The problem is not about children wearing immodest dress. The problem is not about children failing to decide that they don't want to be raped. The problem is with the systematic cover-up of abuse and the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses that allows pedophiles to stay under the radar while molesting multiple children because of primarily the two-witness rule and the fact that if there isn't a second witness to the act, then elders are instructed in their documents to pursue matters scripturally, in other words, to wait on Jehovah, to leave the matter in Jehovah's hands. That's the most urgent problem that needs to be addressed. But I've included this material in my worst 10 videos because it perfectly highlights the problem that at the heart of Watchtower, that they just simply cannot grasp the urgency of changing these policies. And as we slip into number 2 in my list, we're going to see just how firmly Watchtower is sticking to its guns on the two-witness rule.
Now, there's something that the apostates are talking about and trying to put forward. The media has picked it up. Others have also picked it up. And that is our scriptural position of having two witnesses a requirement for judicial action if there's no confession. It's very clear, isn't it? You cannot establish a judicial committee based on one witness. But now listen, here's what they say. Well, now look, the Old Testament also says that adulteresses should be stoned. Now, since you're not doing that, why do you stick to this two-witness rule? And see, if you're not careful, that can do some tricks on your mind because you have to think it through. The scriptures are very clear. Before a judicial committee can be convened, there has to be a confession or two witnesses. So we will never change our scriptural position on that subject.
So this astonishing video also appeared on the November 2017 JW Broadcasting episode. We've just been listening to Gary Bro of the governing body's service committee. He's a helper to the governing body, and I believe he's head, in fact, of the service committee. And he is using a morning worship to effectively put his foot down, or put Watchtower's foot down on the two-witness rule, insisting that it will never, ever be, that they're never going to go back on it. When you look at the actual wording and Bro's statement, what's interesting is that he nowhere mentions child abuse. And that's quite clever, because when he's referring to apostates and the media raising this as an issue, it changes things considerably when we're talking about the safety of children and how how these issues are dealt with. And what's also interesting is that Bro says, well, you cannot establish a judicial committee based on only one witness. That is not what apostates like myself are clamouring for. We're not jumping up and down saying, please, we need you to form a judicial committee, even if there's only one witness, namely the victim, perhaps. What we're saying is, if there is a crime, then you report it to the authorities. It could not be more simple than that. You would think that if Watchtower genuinely takes child abuse seriously as a crime, it will have no problem at all making sure that as soon as it has knowledge of child abuse within a congregation, the phone call will be made to the police. There will be some way of letting the authorities know, listen, we've got a problem, this guy needs to be criminally investigated. We don't have all the information, but we recognise that this falls outside our jurisdiction because we have here an accusation of a crime. But Watchtower doesn't do that. The best that Watchtower, at the moment, the way the policy is, the best that Watchtower will do is say, well, we don't dissuade parents from reporting to the authorities. They don't urge parents to report to the authorities, but they don't dissuade. Use of wording is so crucial there. And of course, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, even if you are a parent of a victim, growing up in Jehovah's Witness culture, where it's all about, oh, you wouldn't dream of taking your brother to court, and oh, the elders deal with everything. They'll just deal with everything for you. It isn't as simple as we saw before, just shifting everything onto the parents and saying, oh, well, it's not our responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility to report. You just cannot be so naive as to make that assumption that parents will report. This is a policy that urgently needs to change. And the distressing thing for those like me who just simply want to see children protected is it's so saddening to see those in the highest parts of the organisation, those in someone here who's head of the service committee. It's so saddening to see them digging their heels in on this, because it really is as simple as saying, is child abuse a crime or is it not? If it's a crime, it needs reporting to the authorities, end of story. So now it's time to look at number 1 in my 10 worst Jehovah's Witness videos of 2017.
When we undergo trials, reviewing Bible accounts of faithful men and women can bolster our own faith. Let's consider one. Her name is Rizpah. We know very little about her. She is first introduced to us as a concubine of King Saul. No doubt she must have been very beautiful to catch the attention of the king. Long after Saul's death, Jehovah tells King David that blood guilt remains on Saul's house due to his attempt to annihilate the Gibeonites, which violated an ancient covenant. Thus, the entire nation of Israel is guilty of shedding innocent blood. How does David resolve this issue? 2 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 3 shows what David did. 2 Samuel 21:3, David asks the Gibeonites, "What should I do for you?" Verse 6, they answer, "Let 7 of Saul's sons be given to us. We'll hang their dead bodies before Jehovah." Verse 6 continues, David said, "I will hand them over." Who does David hand over? He hands over in verse 8, Rizpah's 2 sons. The 2 sons of Rizpah, the 2 people in the whole world that she loved most. What a heartbreaking tragedy for Rizpah. But she could do nothing about it. The decision was made. It was out of her control. Eventually, all 7 men are hung. Now, under the Mosaic law, those executed upon a stake, they should have been taken down before nightfall and buried. Burial would have brought closure to this mother's crushed soul, and above all, it would conform to Jehovah's requirements for the dignity of life. And that proper disposal of the dead body would have been according to Jehovah's instructions. Undoubtedly, Rizpah knows this. But it didn't happen that way. So can you feel her anguish as night approaches and no one comes to take those bodies down?
So bear in mind that this was a talk at the 143rd Gilead graduation. We're hearing here Mark Noumair, who is a helper to the governing body. I believe he's also one of the Gilead instructors. And as an uplifting talk for the graduation, he decides to tell this story of Rizpah, who it seems was, well, we can debate whether she was a real person or not, but for the sake of argument, let's say that Rizpah was a real person and that this account really happened. She was the victim of a grave injustice. She saw her two sons murdered, basically as a form of sacrifice, as a form of ritualistic cleansing of the nation of Israel, because of something that other people had done, because other people other than her two sons had murdered people in cold blood, had murdered innocent people. So because innocent people had been killed, apparently more innocent people needed to be killed. This is the kind of standard that you need to wrap your head around when you're reading the Old Testament. It's crazy. And yet the fact that Rizpah kind of stood aside and let all this happen and cooperated with this bizarre arrangement that we're supposed to admire, this is now being celebrated in the 21st century as an example of the extent to which Jehovah's Witnesses should be loyal to the organization.
One day goes by, the law is not followed, the bodies are not taken down. 2 days go by. 3 days go by. What does she do? Well, according to verse 10, Rizpah continues day after day in the blaze of that scorching summer sun. In fact, verse 10 says what she did do. It says that she didn't allow the birds of the heavens to land on those bodies by day, nor the wild beasts of the field to come near by night. There she was, out there day after day, shooing those birds away. Now, at times, you might feel that your life is outside of your control. You may go through a trial that allows Jehovah's standards and decisions to shape you, perhaps at great personal cost. For example, you're familiar with theocratic procedure, you're familiar with theocratic policies, we know that. But there might come a time when an organizational direction, an organizational procedure is modified for reasons that you are not fully aware of. And that decision affects you personally. What will you do? Like Rizpah, keep doing what you can under your circumstances. Shoo those birds away, those negative thoughts. Stir up that fire. Don't allow your warmth and glow for Jehovah God to burn out. Now, days go by. According to verse 9 and verse 10, from the start of the harvest to the rain. Now, this implies this may have been 5 to 6 months that she kept vigil over her sons' bodies.
So it just goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. The bodies of Rizpah's murdered sons are on open display for 5 to 6 months. Apparently, that was a perfectly normal thing that Rizpah needed to cooperate with. But notice again how the application is being made that witnesses need, and bear in mind that this was being given as a Gilead talk, but it's since been presented to witnesses as the December 2017 JW Broadcasting episode. I've not done a rebuttal for it because, I guess you could say this is my rebuttal. But yeah, this is not just simply like a select audience that's receiving this. This is now 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses are being told, well, there's a lesson here for you. And the lesson is that if there is a shocking injustice in which you are personally involved, perhaps because the organisation has moved the goalposts in terms of its procedures and its moral requirements, its judicial requirements, you need to comply. There can be no questioning. There can be, no complaining. You just have to go along with it. And that is the essence of totalitarian, authoritarian, cult-like control. Don't ask any questions. Just do exactly what we are asking you to do.
So what did David do? Did he now finally give Rizpah's sons a decent burial? Actually, he did more. Verses 12 through 14 show how David had the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan brought all the way from Jabesh Gilead, which might have taken a journey of about 100 miles, and buried those bones with the bones of Rizpah's sons and Saul's family plot in Benjamite territory. So in the end, Rizpah got more than she expected. She saw the bones of her sons and their father buried together. Rizpah didn't see that coming, but it was worth the wait. So what's the big lesson we want you to remember here? Rizpah's love and loyalty and endurance provides an example worth imitating. When you go through a trial, remember that others are observing your conduct. They're watching. And out of frustration, you might feel, well, why haven't the elders done anything? Why aren't the overseers taking care of this situation? Jehovah, why don't you do something? And Jehovah is saying, I am doing something. I'm using your silent example to show others that when you endure a situation, I will reward them. I'll reward them more than they ever anticipated. And it will be worth the wait because I, Jehovah, I love being a rewarder. What a noble and honorable way to be used by Jehovah God.
So apparently Rizpah got her happily ever after because her sons, after 5 to 6 months of being on public display, their corpses hanging there, don't worry, I'm going to fix this, says David. And apparently Rizpah was delighted or thrilled or should have felt privileged that at least her sons got buried with the remains of their father, King Saul. That made everything okay. I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a suggestion. I don't think Mark Noumair has children. I mean, he may have children. I doubt it. If he does have children, then shame on him. Shame on him for choosing this passage out of all of the possible passages in the Bible that he could have chosen to give an uplifting Gilead talk. Shame on him for choosing this one, if he is a parent, which I don't think he is. And I think that's partly the problem when it comes to Watchtower and its short-sightedness when it comes to child abuse in particular, is that we're dealing with a bunch of men who have given their entire lives to serving Watchtower to the extent where they've never had children and don't understand how the importance of protecting them and don't get it. They simply can't fathom the fact that when you are a parent, it's your worst nightmare. Your very worst nightmare is to outlive your children. I don't think that Mark Noumair would be able to give this talk if he were a parent. Maybe he is, I don't know, but I wouldn't be able to speak in those terms, because it would be my worst nightmare to even think about this scenario where you outlive your child, and then to layer onto the story all this gruesomeness of the bodies hanging there for 6 months, and oh, don't worry, I've fixed it all, because now they get to be buried in this VIP section next to a king. Oh well, if I'd only known that at the beginning, well, that makes everything better. What an astonishing story. But notice as well, if you play back, and again, I'd encourage you to watch the whole talk if you can stomach it. This is just the highlights or the lowlights. But we have Mark Noumair applying this to some injustice. Let's say there's an injustice, and you're thinking, well, when's Jehovah going to do something about this? Well, don't worry, Jehovah's got everything under control. And actually, just by your being silent and not complaining, you're part of the success story, as it were. It's all part of God's plan. That is exactly the sort of thinking that allows child abuse to be rampant in the organisation. That's exactly the sort of thinking that allows elders to cover up abuse, because they buy into this awful, awful thinking that God's just going to make everything, he's going to sort everything out. Leave the matter in Jehovah's hands is what elders are told to do in the Shepherd book. Everything's going to magically correct itself. In this instance, it didn't correct itself. It would not have been a consolation for me. Oh, well, at least your child has been buried in the VIP section. Wouldn't make a difference. They're still dead. It's just their physical remains. How is that any consolation? But again, this is how heartless. And I'm sorry, Mark Noumair, if you happen to be watching this, you're a heartless man. And in a way, I'm glad, although this is, I feel, the worst of the videos that were released in 2017, for reasons I hopefully don't need to explain. In a way, I'm glad that this video has gone out on a JW Broadcasting episode, because that means more people will have watched it. And in a way, I want Jehovah's Witnesses to see this. I want Jehovah's Witnesses to see that this is what their leaders are capable of. This is how uncaring and hollow emotionally the leaders of the Watchtower organisation are. You know, try listening to that as a parent and sympathise. If you can sympathise at all with that talk and find it remotely endearing, there's no other way of saying it. There's something wrong with you, I'm afraid. Because that is essentially a talk. This is telling 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses to bypass their humanity. Forget about what's right and what's wrong. We decide what's right and what's wrong. So even if it's blatantly wrong, even if it's blatantly evil, you just sit back and stay silent and leave it all in Jehovah's hands, because he will figure out a way of rewarding you. So, what an astonishing video. But again, hopefully you can understand why it's made it to the top of my 10 worst Jehovah's Witness videos of 2017. And I thought this video would be interesting to do. I've actually toyed with the idea of doing it for previous years, but I never got round to doing like a summary. So what I'm actually going to do, because I think this is a useful means of documenting precisely what gets presented to witnesses in each year. So I'm actually going to go back and do this video for 2016, 2015, and maybe 2014, if there's enough material for 2014, which there may be, I don't know. But I'm actually going to go back and make similar videos, and hopefully around this time next year, if I'm still around. Hopefully this time next year I'll do a similar one for 2018, because I think it's a useful way, again, of just documenting what Watchtower is putting out to witnesses. Now, I'm going to leave you with a clip. I'm going to play you out with some quite remarkable music that was actually part of the Gilead graduation, the same Gilead graduation that the Rizpah talk was given in. Now, for the purposes of keeping this video compliant with copyright law, I need to offer some kind of criticism of the video before showing it. So all I'm going to say is that, and hopefully you'll see for yourself, this is essentially the students' song. I don't know whether you recall, but now there's a special sort of chat show format for interviewing Gilead students called The Inside Story. And they have the students do a song with instruments and everything. And this was just a really, really cheesy song that the students did for the 143rd Gilead class. And all I will say is that I when I first saw this, obviously I found it hilarious, but I also thought, I don't recognize this organization anymore. And I'm increasingly thinking that as I watch Watchtower video propaganda, we used to pride ourselves on being serious, on treating our beliefs in a sacred way, so that we didn't do anything that could be laughed at, or we didn't do anything that kind of demeaned our beliefs. This song is basically a happy, clappy, evangelical Christian song. And what amazes me is that it's made it into the Gilead program, because it's basically a parody to itself. It doesn't need really my commentary. You'll see for yourself. It's just a total parody of itself. But it amazes me that Watchtower can't realize that, and that when they were editing this video, they couldn't have found some way of making it less cheesy and less fake and just less appalling. Anyway, I think I've said enough in terms of criticism to get away with playing it. But allow me to play you out with the graduates from the 143rd Gilead class. I hope you found this video interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.
Recently, the governing body has given us loving encouragement through our regional convention program to never give up. Now, the Gilead students have written a song that goes right along with that spirit and that theme. It's entitled, "We'll Never Let Go."
Around the world, God's servants all rejoice. We praise Jehovah with a cheerful voice. Whatever comes our way, we fear no harm. We will get through, we have God's mighty arm. We won't give up, and no, we won't give in. Jehovah's on our side, this is a race we'll win. We'll weather storms, Jehovah's strength will know. Of his right hand, of his mighty arm, we'll never let go. Uncertainties we'll surely face in life, but we'll be strong, we see beyond the strife. We will uphold Jehovah's sovereignty as we display our own integrity. We won't give up, and no, we won't give in. Jehovah's on our side, this is a race we'll win. We'll weather storms, Jehovah's strength his mighty arm will never let go. We won't give up, and no, we won't give in. Jehovah's on our side. This is a race. We'll win, we'll weather storms. Jehovah's strength will know of his right hand, of his mighty arm. We'll never let go. We'll never let go.
I thought that was a thrilling song. You brothers and sisters did a marvelous job on that.